You probably know someone like this, maybe very well. Someone who never seems to lose an argument, not because they always have the best point, but because they simply refuse to consider the possibility that they might be wrong. And the strange thing is, they don't come across as arrogant all the time. Sometimes they're charming, even generous, the kind of person people genuinely enjoy being around. But the moment someone disagrees with them, something shifts. There's a subtle tension in the room, a quiet pressure that builds until the other person backs down or changes the subject. And somehow, every single time, he walks away convinced that he was right. I've noticed this pattern in so many people, across so many different situations, and what strikes me every time is how invisible it is, even to the person doing it. Because here's what I want you to understand from the very beginning. This isn't just stubbornness, and it's not simply a bad habit someone picked up along the way. There is something much deeper going on underneath the surface, something psychological, something that actually makes perfect sense once you see it clearly. So what is actually happening inside the mind of someone who always needs to be right? Psychologists have a term for the tendency to seek out information that confirms what we already believe and ignore everything that challenges it. They call it confirmation bias. But I want to go further than that, because for some people, this goes well beyond a cognitive shortcut. For some people, being right isn't just a preference, it's a psychological need. He doesn't experience disagreement the way most people do, as a difference of opinion that can be discussed and resolved. He experiences it as a threat, not to his argument, but to his identity. When someone tells him he's wrong, what he hears on some level is, "You are not good enough. You don't know what you're talking about. You are less than I thought you were." And that feeling, even when it's unconscious, is unbearable. So his mind does what all minds do when they feel threatened. It defends. You may have experienced this dynamic yourself, on either side of it, and walked away feeling confused about what just happened. Because on the surface, it looked like a disagreement about facts or decisions, but underneath, it felt like something much more personal. And that's exactly what it was. What makes this pattern so fascinating, and honestly so difficult to deal with, is that it doesn't always look the same from the outside. It shows up in different ways, through different behaviors, some obvious and some so subtle you might not even notice them until you know what to look for. In this video, I want to walk you through 7 signs that reveal the psychology of someone who cannot allow themselves to be wrong. These aren't random behaviors, they form a pattern, and together they tell a very clear story about what's happening beneath the surface. I've arranged them in a specific order, starting with the ones that are easiest to recognize on the outside and moving gradually toward the ones that are harder to see, but far more revealing about what's really driving this. By the time we reach the last one, I think you'll have a very different understanding of someone you may have been trying to figure out for years. Let's start with the behavior most people notice first. He turns every disagreement into a debate he has to win. I want you to picture a simple, everyday conversation, maybe at dinner, maybe at work, maybe just between 2 people who know each other well. Someone raises a point he disagrees with, and instead of engaging with it openly, he immediately shifts into a mode that feels less like a conversation and more like a courtroom. He brings up counterpoints before he's fully heard the original point. He looks for the weakest part of what you said and focuses entirely on that, ignoring everything else. He speaks with a certainty that makes it very difficult for the other person to hold their ground.
And here's what I find most interesting about this. He's not always wrong about the facts, but that's not really the point. The point is that winning has become the goal, and understanding has become secondary. You probably know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of this. You start a conversation genuinely, and somewhere along the way, you realize the other person stopped listening and started building a case. Psychologically, this happens because his brain has linked being right with being safe, and being wrong with a kind of internal collapse he can't afford to experience. So every conversation that touches on anything he believes becomes, without him even realizing it, a test he has to pass. And this need to win doesn't stay in the big moments. It starts showing up everywhere, even in the smallest exchanges, which brings us to something that often goes unnoticed. He rewrites the past to make sure he was always right. This one is subtle and is one of the most psychologically revealing behaviors on this entire list. When something doesn't go the way he predicted, or when a decision he made turns out to be wrong, something interesting happens to his memory. The story shifts. Suddenly, he remembers warning people about this. He remembers having doubts he never actually expressed. He remembers saying something slightly different from what he actually said. And the unsettling part is that he's not always lying. He genuinely believes the revised version. This is what psychologists call memory reconsolidation influenced by ego protection, and it happens automatically, below the level of conscious thought. His mind quietly edits the past to preserve the image of someone who knew what they were doing all along. I've seen this create enormous confusion in relationships because the other person clearly remembers what was said, and suddenly they're being told that their memory is wrong. You might have found yourself in exactly that situation, doubting your own recollection because he was so confident in his version of events. That confidence isn't evidence that he's right. It's evidence of how deeply he needs to be. And once you understand that his past is being quietly rewritten to protect his present self-image, the next sign starts to make a lot more sense. He finds it almost impossible to say, "I was wrong." There are 3 words that most adults find genuinely difficult to say. I was wrong. But for him, those 3 words aren't just uncomfortable, they feel structurally impossible, like they would require dismantling something essential about how he sees himself. Watch what happens when he's clearly made a mistake. He might acknowledge that the outcome wasn't ideal, but frame it as circumstances beyond his control. He might accept partial responsibility while redistributing the rest to someone or something else. He might pivot so quickly to what he's doing to fix it that the admission of error gets completely bypassed. And sometimes he just goes quiet and waits for the moment to pass. What he almost never does is look someone in the eye and say, "I got that wrong, and I'm sorry." This isn't because he lacks intelligence or even self-awareness in other areas of his life. It's because for him, admitting a mistake isn't just an admission about a specific situation. It feels like an admission about who he fundamentally is. His identity has become fused with his judgments, so when a judgment is wrong, the threat doesn't feel contained. It feels total. And if you've ever tried to get a genuine apology from someone like this, you already know how exhausting and disorienting that experience can be. But here's something I find important to hold on to. The inability to say, "I was wrong," is usually not about arrogance alone. It's about fear, and that distinction matters enormously for what comes next. He dismisses other people's expertise without realizing he's doing it.
He doesn't think of himself as someone who ignores experts. In fact, he would probably tell you he respects expertise very much. But watch what happens when an expert says something that contradicts what he already believes. Suddenly, that expert has an agenda. Their credentials aren't quite as impressive as they seem. Their methodology is flawed, or their sample size was too small, or they're probably not accounting for some variable that he, having thought about this for a weekend, has already considered. He doesn't do this because he's stupid. Often the opposite is true. He does this because his mind has a very sophisticated mechanism for protecting existing beliefs, and that mechanism is highly creative when it needs to be. Psychologists call this the backfire effect. When confronted with evidence that challenges a deeply held belief, some people don't update their view, they double down on it. And the more confident he is in his own judgment, the easier he can rationalize dismissing information that doesn't fit. You might have watched this happen in real time, maybe even tried to present him with solid evidence on something, only to find that the evidence itself became the problem. The frustrating thing is that from the inside, none of this feels like avoidance. It feels like critical thinking. And that's precisely what makes it so difficult to address, which leads directly into one of the most quietly damaging behaviors on this list. He makes the other person feel like the problem. This one takes a moment to recognize because it's so seamlessly woven into how he communicates. When a conflict arises, something interesting happens to the dynamic. The original issue, whatever was actually being discussed, slowly gets replaced by a conversation about how the other person is communicating, or overreacting, or misunderstanding things. You came to him with a concern, and somehow, 10 minutes later, you're the one explaining yourself. You're being told you're too sensitive, or that you always do this, or that you're making something out of nothing. And because he says it with such certainty, and often with what looks like calm reasonableness, it starts to feel like maybe he's right. Psychologically, this is a form of deflection, not always conscious, not always intentional, but deeply functional, because it moves the spotlight away from any examination of his own behavior. It also has the effect of training the people around him to be very careful about how they approach him, which means fewer challenges, fewer uncomfortable conversations, and fewer moments where he has to confront the possibility that he might be wrong. I want to be honest with you here. This behavior, over time, has a real cost to the people on the receiving end of it. It creates self-doubt in people who had nothing to doubt in the first place. Recognizing it for what it is, a defensive move, not an accurate reflection of reality, is one of the most important things someone in that situation can do. Because once you see the deflection clearly, you start to notice something even more fundamental about how he moves through the world. He confuses confidence with certainty, and certainty with truth. There's a quality that people who always need to be right tend to share, and it's something that can be genuinely magnetic, at least at first. They are almost always extremely confident. They speak with an authority that makes other people lean in. They don't hedge, they don't qualify, they don't say, "I think," or "it seems like," very often. They state. And in a world where most people are uncertain about most things most of the time, that level of confidence can feel like a kind of relief. But here's the psychological reality underneath it. For him, confidence isn't just a communication style, it's a defense mechanism. Expressing doubt, even small doubt, even appropriate doubt, feels like cracking open a door he cannot afford to open. So certainty becomes his default, regardless of whether the situation actually calls for it. And over time, this creates a deeply distorted relationship with truth, because he has started to experience his own certainty as evidence that he is correct, when in reality, certainty and correctness have almost nothing to do with each other. You may have noticed that the most genuinely knowledgeable people in any field tend to be the most comfortable saying, "I don't know," or "I could be wrong about this," because real expertise includes an understanding of its own limits. He has not made peace with his limits, and so certainty fills the gap that genuine knowledge sometimes leaves open. And when you understand this, the final sign makes complete, quiet sense. Deep down, he is terrified of being seen as inadequate.
This is the one that everything else flows from, and I think it's the most important thing I want to say in this entire video. Underneath all the debate winning and the memory rewriting and the expert dismissing and the deflecting, underneath all of it, there is almost always a person who is deeply afraid. Not afraid of being wrong in an abstract sense, afraid of being seen as not enough, not smart enough, not capable enough, not worth taking seriously. At some point, often early in life, though not always, he developed a belief, sometimes explicit and sometimes entirely unconscious, that his value as a person was tied to his competence, that to be wrong was to be lesser, that to not know was to be exposed as someone who didn't belong at the table. And so the entire architecture of behavior we've been walking through, all 7 signs, is not really about arrogance in the way most people think of it. It's a very elaborate, very exhausting system of self-protection built around a wound that was probably never fully acknowledged and almost certainly never fully healed. I find this genuinely important to understand, not because it excuses the behavior, it doesn't, and the impact on the people around him is real, regardless of the underlying cause, but because it changes the question from why is he so insufferable to what is he so afraid of losing? And that second question opens up a much more honest conversation about what's actually happening. When you look at all 7 of these signs together, something becomes very clear. This isn't a collection of separate bad habits or personality flaws scattered randomly across someone's character. It is one coherent psychological system built to do one thing: protect a self-image that cannot survive being wrong. Every argument he has to win, every memory he quietly revises, every apology he cannot give, every expert he finds a reason to dismiss, every conversation he redirects back toward you, all of it is in service of that single underlying need. And the tragedy in it, the part that I think is worth sitting with, is that the very system designed to protect him from feeling inadequate is usually the thing that keeps him most isolated. Because real connection, real intimacy, real trust, real partnership requires the ability to say, I got that wrong, and I'm still here, and so are you. I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with it honestly for a moment. Is there someone in your life who came to mind while you were watching this? Maybe it's someone you love, someone you work alongside every day, someone you've been trying to understand for a long time without quite having the language to do it. Or maybe, and I say this without any judgment because I think it takes real courage to look at this honestly, maybe some of what you heard here felt, in a quiet way, familiar from the inside. Most of us have moments where we dig in too hard, where we find it difficult to admit we were wrong, where we subtly redirect instead of genuinely listening. The difference is in the degree, in the pattern, in how much of someone's daily life is organized around avoiding that one unbearable feeling. I don't think the goal here is to diagnose someone or to win an argument about their psychology. I think the goal is simply to see more clearly, because the clearer we see, the better we can decide how to respond, how to protect ourselves if we need to, and sometimes how to offer a different kind of conversation to someone who has never been shown that being wrong doesn't have to mean being broken. If this brought someone to mind, you might be wondering what you can actually do when you're in a relationship or a dynamic with someone like this, because understanding the psychology is one thing, but navigating it day to day is something else entirely. That's exactly what I explore in the next video, where I go into the specific patterns that play out in close relationships with people who cannot tolerate being wrong, and what actually tends to shift things, if anything can. I think you'll find it completes a lot of what we started here, and it answers some of the questions this video probably raised for you. Thank you for watching this one all the way through. It genuinely means a lot that you stayed with it. If something in this video resonated with you, I'd really love to know. Leave a comment below and tell me, do you have someone like this in your life, or have you ever caught yourself in one of these patterns? There's no wrong answer, and honestly, the most interesting conversations I have are in the comments section, so I'd love to hear from you. If you found this useful, a like goes a long way in helping other people find this kind of content. And if you want to keep exploring topics like this, the quiet psychological patterns that shape how we relate to each other, subscribing means you won't miss what's coming next. I'll see you in the next one.